I never thought my wardrobe would become a family crisis. But when my daughter-in-law publicly humiliated me over my clothes, calling them embarrassingly outdated at a family dinner, I had to make a decision. Was I going to let this slide? Like all the other subtle jabs, or was it time to show her that disrespect comes with consequences? What happened next shocked everyone, especially when she discovered our joint account was frozen solid. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. At you. 62, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. After losing my husband Richard 5 years ago to heart failure, I'd managed to create a comfortable routine for myself in our suburban home in Oak Ridge, Connecticut. The two-story colonial we'd purchased together 30 years ago felt both comforting and sometimes painfully empty. But I'd learned to find peace in my solitude. My name is Margaret Wilson, Maggie to my friends, and until recently, I considered my relationship with my only son Jason and his wife Amber to be, well, functional. Not particularly warm, but not openly hostile either. Jason had always been a good son, calling regularly and visiting when he could, though those visits became noticeably less frequent after he married Amber 3 years ago. Amber Reynolds Wilson was 17 years younger than me, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from expensive skincare routines and regular visits to exclusive salons. From the moment Jason introduced us at a restaurant in Boston where they lived, I sensed her evaluating me, my clothes, my hair, my mannerisms, with a scrutiny that made me uncomfortable. Still, I was determined to embrace her for Jason's sake. The trouble began in earnest last summer when Jason received a promotion that moved them from Boston to Hartford, only 30 minutes from my home. What should have been wonderful news, having my son nearby again, quickly revealed itself as something more complicated. "Mom, we're so excited to be closer to you," Jason had said during their first visit to my home after the move. His smile was genuine, his eyes bright with optimism. Amber, meanwhile, surveyed my living room with barely concealed disappointment. "It's so quaint," she said, running a manicured finger along my bookshelf. "Very 1990s. I let the comment slide, as I had countless others. After all, I hadn't redecorated much since Richard passed. What was the point when it was just me? "Let me show you what I've done with the garden," I offered, leading them outside to my pride and joy, a sprawling collection of perennials and vegetable plots that had become my therapy after becoming a widow. Even there, Amber found fault. "Wouldn't roses be more elegant than all these? What are they? Daisies?" "Black-eyed Susans," I corrected gently. "Richard loved them." A flicker of something, pity perhaps, crossed her face. "Well, I suppose they're cheerful." The dynamic continued this way through the fall and winter. Jason and Amber would visit every few weeks, and each time, Amber would offer some helpful suggestion about my home, my hair, my hobbies. I weathered these comments quietly, reminding myself that family peace was worth a few bruised feelings. What no one besides Richard had ever fully understood about me was that beneath my accommodating exterior lay a woman who had successfully managed our family's finances through decades of economic ups and downs. Richard had been the charismatic one, the life of every party, but I was the one who had quietly invested our savings, paid off our mortgage early, and ensured we'd have enough for retirement. After his death, I continued managing our, now my, assets with the same careful precision. This fact became relevant when Jason approached me in March with an unexpected request. "Mom, Amber, and I found the perfect house," he said over coffee in my kitchen one Saturday morning. Amber wasn't with him, a rare occurrence that should have been my first clue that something significant was coming. "That's wonderful, honey," I replied, Genuinely happy for them. They'd been renting since the move. It's in Westfield. That new development with the golf course? 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen. His voice trailed off and he fidgeted with his coffee mug. I waited, sensing there was more. The thing is, he continued, not quite meeting my eyes, we're a little short on the down payment. The housing market is crazy right now, and we need to move fast. How much do you need? I asked directly. 50,000, he admitted, finally looking up. We'd pay you back, of course, and we were thinking that since you're all alone in this big house, maybe you'd consider, well, moving in with us eventually? We could convert the guest house for you. The suggestion hung in the air between us. I took a measured sip of my coffee, considering his words carefully. I'm not ready to. Leave this home, Jason, I said finally. Too many memories, but I can help with the down payment. Relief flooded his features. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. I nodded, already mentally calculating how to structure this financial arrangement. I'll need to talk to my bank. Let's set up a joint account, temporarily, so I can transfer the funds easily. We should have a repayment plan in writing, though. Nothing complicated, just something that outlines expectations. Jason's smile faltered slightly. Is that really necessary? Between family? Especially between family, I countered gently. Your father taught me that clear financial boundaries prevent misunderstandings later. He agreed, albeit reluctantly, and the following week we established a joint account. The agreement was simple. The money was specifically for their home down payment, and they would begin repaying me in 6 months, after they were settled. The account would remain active until the loan was fully repaid, giving me visibility into the repayment progress. What I didn't share with Jason was that I had actually transferred $70,000 to the account, not just the $50,000 they'd requested. The extra $20,000 was my gift to them, something I planned to reveal once they'd moved into their new home. Despite Amber's sharp edges, I wanted to support my son's happiness. They closed on their house in April, a sprawling neo-colonial, in an upscale neighborhood that screamed, "We've arrived." I attended their housewarming party in early May, bringing a handmade quilt as a gift. It was one I'd worked on for months, incorporating fabrics that held special meaning. A piece of Jason's high school graduation gown, a swatch from Richard's favorite shirt, even a bit of the blanket Jason had loved as a baby. Amber received it with a tight smile. How traditional, she said, setting it aside quickly to show me where they'd positioned their new Italian leather sectional. The evening progressed pleasantly enough, though I couldn't help noticing that none of my contributions to their down payment had been acknowledged in front of the other guests, all Amber's friends and colleagues. When Jason gave a toast thanking everyone for their support, he mentioned his boss's housewarming gift, but not the significant financial help that had made this purchase possible. I told myself it didn't matter. I hadn't helped them for recognition. Still, a small part of me felt invisible in their new life. The incident that changed everything happened 3 weeks later. Jason invited me to dinner at their new home on a Friday evening, mentioning that Amber's parents would be there too. I'd met Robert and Catherine Mitchell only once at the wedding, where they'd been polite but distant. I dressed carefully in navy slacks and a cream blouse that I'd recently purchased from Talbot's. Nothing flashy, but neat and appropriate. I added pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary and arrived precisely at 6:30 with a bottle of good Cabernet. The Mitchells were already there, cocktails in hand, when Jason welcomed me inside. Catherine Mitchell's appraising glance at my outfit was subtle, but unmistakable. She herself wore designer jeans and a cashmere wrap that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Margaret, so nice to see you again," she said, her Boston accent emphasizing the gap between our worlds. "Likewise," I replied, handing the wine to Jason. Amber appeared from the kitchen, resplendent in a jumpsuit that looked simple, but which I was certain carried an exorbitant price tag. "Maggie," she said, though she knew I preferred Margaret. From non-close friends, We're just about to sit down. Dinner was elaborate: sous vide salmon, quinoa with roasted vegetables, and some sort of deconstructed salad that required assembly at the table. The conversation flowed around topics I had little connection to: the right trainers for their new Peloton, the Mediterranean cruise the Mitchells had just booked, the charity gala Amber was helping organize. I was content to listen, offering the occasional comment and complimenting the food. It wasn't until dessert, a complicated parfait with edible flowers, that things unraveled. "So, Margaret," Robert Mitchell began, "Jason tells us you've been quite helpful with their new home purchase." Finally, I thought, an acknowledgement. "I was happy to assist," I said simply. "Mom's always been great with money," Jason added, a note of pride in his voice that warmed me. Amber set down her spoon with a barely audible clink. "Speaking of being helpful," she said, turning to me with what I recognized as her faux concerned expression, "I've been meaning to talk to you about something." The table fell silent. "Your clothes, Margaret," she continued, her voice dripping with forced sympathy. "They're so dated. I mean, that blouse, it ages you terribly. Don't you think?" She looked to her mother for support. Catherine nodded, sagely. "Fashion is important at every age. Perhaps you could take Margaret shopping, Amber? Find her something more current." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. My cheeks burned as I looked down at my perfectly acceptable blouse. "I'm quite comfortable with my style, thank you," I managed to say evenly. "But that's just it," Amber pressed, leaning forward. "You shouldn't be comfortable looking so, well, embarrassing. Especially now that you're connected to our social circle. People notice these things." Jason shifted uncomfortably beside her, but said nothing to defend me. "I wasn't aware I was an embarrassment to you," I said quietly, placing my napkin beside my half-eaten dessert. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Amber laughed, though no one joined her. "I'm just trying to help. You're living in the past in so many ways. Your house, your clothes, even that quilt you gave us, which, by the way, clashes horribly with our bedroom decor." The quilt comment struck deeper than anything else. Hours of love and memories, dismissed as an eyesore. "I see," was all I could manage. "What Amber means," Jason finally interjected, "is that we care about you, Mom. We want you to be your best self." "My best self," I repeated slowly, looking at my son, really looking at him. In that moment, I saw not the boy I'd raised, but a man who would sit silently while his wife belittled his mother. A man who had accepted my financial help without proper acknowledgement. A man who had forgotten where he came from. I stood up, smoothing my embarrassing blouse. "Thank you for dinner. I should be going." "Margaret, don't be dramatic," Catherine sighed. "Amber's just being honest." "Yes, honesty is important," I agreed, my voice steadier than I felt. "As is respect." I left, without another word, driving home in a strange state of calm fury. By the time I reached my outdated home, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I called my bank and froze the joint account I shared with Jason. Then I checked our written agreement carefully. Yes, the funds were specifically designated for their home down payment, which had already been made. Any other use would technically be a violation of our terms. Next, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been considering for months. I booked a 2-week tour of Italy. Richard and I had always dreamed of visiting Tuscany together. Now I would go alone, with the trip leaving in just 3 days. The cost was considerable, almost exactly $20,000, but I had been saving for this possibility. Finally, I drafted an email to Jason, attaching our original agreement and a bank statement showing that the joint account had been frozen. "Dear Jason," I wrote, Yesterday's dinner made it clear that my presence in your life is an embarrassment. I've decided to step back and give you and Amber the space you apparently need. The joint account has been temporarily frozen while I review our financial arrangement. As per our agreement, those funds were specifically for your home down payment, which has been completed. I'll be traveling for the next 2 weeks and will be unavailable. We can discuss next steps when I return. Love, Mom. I hit send, then turned off my phone and began packing. The navy blouse went into the suitcase along with several other embarrassing items from my wardrobe. In Italy, perhaps I would find some new clothes, not to please Amber, but to please myself. As I folded the last items into my suitcase, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of standing up for myself. Richard would have been proud, and somewhere deep inside, I knew that the lesson I was teaching Jason was an important one, even if it came with temporary pain. The joint account would remain frozen until I returned from Italy. What happened after that would depend on whether my son remembered the values I'd raised him with: respect, gratitude, and the understanding that family loyalty goes both ways. The flight to Rome was long but surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, free from the constant need to meet expectations I could never satisfy. The elderly gentleman seated beside me was traveling to visit his daughter, who had married an Italian vineyard owner. First, "Time in Italy?" he asked as we crossed the Atlantic. "Yes," I admitted. "It was supposed to be a trip with my late husband, but—" I paused, realizing I didn't want to dive into my personal sorrows with a stranger. Life had other plans. He nodded knowingly. The best journeys are the unexpected ones. I had booked myself into a modest but charming hotel in Florence's historic center. My room overlooked a small piazza where locals gathered each evening, the sounds of animated Italian conversations and clinking glasses floating up to my window. It was magical and exactly what I needed. By my 3rd day in Italy, I had still not turned on my phone. Instead, I immersed myself in art museums, historic churches, and long walks along the Arno River. I found myself thinking of Richard often, imagining his delight at the Botticelli paintings, or his appreciation for the perfect espresso I discovered at a tiny cafe near the Ponte Vecchio. It was in that cafe that I met Elena, a 60-something expatriate from Chicago who had moved to Florence after her divorce 15 years earlier. "You look like someone who's finally taking a deep breath," she observed as we both waited for our coffees. Something about her forthright manner made me smile. "That obvious?" "Only to another woman who's done the same," she replied. We ended up sharing a table, and I found myself telling her about Jason, Amber, and my impromptu escape. "Good for you," she said firmly when I described freezing the account. "Sometimes the younger generation needs a reality check." "I worry I overreacted," I confessed. "Jason is still my son." Elena stirred her espresso thoughtfully. "When my daughter went through her entitled phase, married a banker who thought money was the answer to everything, I had to step back. Best thing I ever did. Now she calls me twice a week and we actually talk, like adults." "What changed?" I asked, desperately hoping for a blueprint. "She had to miss me before she could see me," Elena said simply. "And her husband had to learn that family isn't a resource to be exploited. It took time." We exchanged contact information before parting, and Elena insisted I join her the following day for a shopping expedition. "Not because there's anything wrong with your clothes," she clarified, "but because Italian fashion is too beautiful to resist." That shopping trip became one of the highlights of my journey. Elena knew precisely which boutiques to visit, small, family-owned shops where the proprietors greeted her like an old friend. I purchased several items that I genuinely loved: a buttery soft leather handbag in a rich cognac color, a pair of Italian loafers that felt like walking on clouds, and a silk scarf in shades of blue and gold that brought out the color of my eyes. "See how it frames your face?" Elena said as the shopkeeper wrapped the scarf. That's what fashion should do. Enhance what's already there, not try to create something artificial. By the end of my first week in Italy, I had begun to rediscover parts of myself that had been dormant since Richard's death. My love of art, my enjoyment of new foods, my ability to navigate unfamiliar surroundings. I had even started a small watercolor sketchbook, capturing the views from different cafes where I lingered over long lunches. It was during one of these lunches, at a trattoria in the Oltrarno district, that I finally turned on my phone. The barrage of notifications was immediate and overwhelming. 12 missed calls from Jason, 27 text messages, and 15 emails. I took a deep breath and ordered another glass of wine before beginning to sort through them. The messages followed a predictable arc. The first few were angry and defensive. "Mom, what are you doing?" Amber was just trying to help. "Call me ASAP. This is completely inappropriate. We need that account accessible. You're overreacting. Please call me." Then came the panicked ones. "Are you okay? No one can reach you." "I'm getting worried. Where are you?" "Mom, seriously, this isn't funny. I'm about to call the police." And finally, by day 5, contrition began to seep in. "I'm sorry about dinner. Amber shouldn't have said those things. Can we please talk? I miss you." The most recent message, sent just 2 hours earlier, caught me off guard. "Amber and I are having some serious problems. I could really use your advice. Please call when you can." I stared at the screen, swirling the last of my wine. Part of me wanted to call him immediately, my maternal instinct to comfort my child in distress. But another part, the part that had been quietly growing stronger in Florence's sunlit streets, counseled patience. Jason needed to realize that actions and inactions had consequences. I composed a brief email instead. "Dear Jason, I'm well and currently traveling internationally. I'll be home in 1 week. We can talk then. Take care, Mom." Then I tucked my phone back into my new leather handbag and ordered a tiramisu to enjoy while watching the afternoon light change over the Arno. The problems back home would wait. Second week in Italy passed even more quickly than the first. Elena introduced me to her circle of expatriate friends, artists, writers, and retired professionals who had chosen to spend their golden years in this beautiful city. I was drawn into their world of gallery openings, home-cooked dinners on terraces overlooking the city, and passionate debates about books and politics. On my final evening, Elena hosted a small dinner party in my honor. Her apartment, a renovated space in a 15th-century building, was filled with artwork and treasures collected during her years in Italy. 6 of us gathered around her table, enjoying homemade pappardelle with wild boar ragu and plenty of local wine. "To Margaret," Elena toasted, raising her glass, "who came to Florence as a visitor and leaves as a friend. And who will definitely be back," I added, touched by their warmth and acceptance. Later, as we stood on her balcony watching the city lights, Elena handed me a small wrapped package. A little something to remember us by. Inside was a beautiful, leather-bound journal. "For the next chapter," she said, "which I think might be quite interesting." I hugged her tightly, realizing that this unexpected friendship was perhaps the most valuable souvenir I could bring home. The flight back to Connecticut felt different from the outbound journey. Instead of escape, I was returning with purpose. Whatever awaited me, Jason's marital problems, Amber's reaction to the frozen account, the ongoing dynamics with my daughter-in-law, I would face it from a position of renewed strength. I had deliberately not told Jason my exact return date, so there was no one waiting when my taxi pulled up to my colonial home. It looked exactly as I'd left it, though my neighbor Mrs. Hendricks had evidently been watering my garden as promised. The black-eyed Susans were in full summer bloom, their bright faces turning toward the sun. Once inside, I unpacked methodically, hanging my new Italian clothes in the closet alongside my existing wardrobe. I didn't intend to discard my embarrassing blouses or comfortable slacks. They were part of me, too. But the new pieces represented something important: my choice, my taste, my life. After a light dinner and a bath to combat jet lag, I checked my email one last time before bed. There was a new message from Jason, sent just an hour earlier. "Mom, I hope you're back soon. Things have gotten worse with Amber. I moved out yesterday and am staying at Dave's place. We need to talk about the account and other things. I owe you an apology." I closed my laptop without responding. Tomorrow would be soon enough to wade back into these troubled waters. Tonight, I would sleep in my own bed and dream of Tuscan hills. Jason arrived at my door the following afternoon. I'd spent the morning puttering in my garden, reconnecting with my home, and preparing myself mentally for whatever was to come. When the doorbell rang, I took a moment to straighten my new Italian scarf before answering. My son looked terrible, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, clothes rumpled as if he'd slept in them. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He moved to hug me, then hesitated, as if unsure of his welcome. I opened my arms and pulled him close. Whatever had happened, he was still my child. "Come in," I said after a moment, leading him to the kitchen where I had coffee brewing. "Sit down and tell me what's going on." He collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, the same table where, months earlier, he had asked me for the down payment money. "Everything's falling apart," he said, accepting the mug I offered. "Start at the beginning," I suggested, taking the seat across from him. The story emerged in painful fragments. After I had left for Italy, Amber had been furious about the frozen account. "She kept saying you had no right, that the money was promised to us," Jason explained. "She wanted to call her father's lawyer." "And what did you think?" I asked quietly. He had the grace to look ashamed. "At first I was angry too. It felt like you were punishing us." "Not us, Jason. Just the behavior." He nodded slowly. "I started to realize that after a few days. When you didn't respond to any messages, I had time to think about everything. About how Amber treated you at dinner. About how I just sat there. Why did you?" I asked the question I'd been carrying across an ocean and back. "I don't know," he said, staring into his coffee. "I guess Amber can be so forceful, and her parents were there, and I wanted them to like me. It sounds pathetic now." "It sounds human," I corrected gently. "But yes, it was hurtful." "I'm sorry, Mom. Really sorry." I reached across to touch his hand briefly. "Thank you." "What happened next with Amber?" His expression darkened. "When she couldn't access the joint account, she started using our regular checking account for some major purchases: designer furniture, a hot tub installation, a trip to New York with her mother. When I questioned it, she said she deserved these things after settling for a house that wasn't as luxurious as she wanted." "I see," I said, though privately I wondered how a 3,500 square foot home with a gourmet kitchen could be considered settling. "Then last week I found something on her laptop," he continued. "She'd left it open while she was at a spa day. There were emails between her and her mom from before we even found the house. They were planning." "Planning what?" "How to convince me to ask you for money?" he said, his voice hollow. "Her mom suggested highlighting how the guest house could be perfect for you when the time comes, even though they never actually wanted you to move in. There was this whole strategy about getting access to your finances." The revelation didn't shock me as much as it might have before my trip. In some ways, I had sensed Amber's calculations from the beginning. "And when you confronted her?" "She didn't even deny it. She said it was just smart family planning, that your money would be mine eventually anyway, so what was the problem?" When I told her it was deceptive and wrong, she laughed and said I was being naive. Jason ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We had a huge fight. She called me ungrateful, said I should be thanking her for finding ways to maximize our inheritance. That's when I realized I didn't even recognize who I'd married. People show you who they are eventually, I said. Sometimes it takes a while to see it clearly. I packed a bag and went to Dave's the next day, he continued, referring to his college friend who lived nearby. Amber's been blowing up my phone, alternating between threats and apologies. Her father called to tell me I'm making a terrible mistake. "And what do you think?" I asked. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "I think I've been making a terrible mistake for a long time now. Starting with not standing up for you." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between us. Outside, a summer breeze rustled through the garden, carrying the scent of flowers through the open window. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Divorce, probably. I can't go back, not after seeing that side of her. But I'm worried about the house, the finances. Everything's so tangled up." "Those are practical problems," I said. "They can be solved practically." "The joint account," he began hesitately. "I'll unfreeze it," I said. "But we'll need to rethink the terms of that arrangement." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "And Mom? I want you to know I never saw your clothes as embarrassing, or your house or anything about you. You've always been the most elegant woman I know, in all the ways that actually matter." I smiled, touching the edge of my new silk scarf. "Well, I did pick up a few things in Italy, but not because anyone made me feel I needed them." His eyes widened slightly. "Italy? That's where you went?" "Florence, specifically. It was wonderful. I made some new friends, visited museums, ate too much pasta." I didn't elaborate on the deeper aspects of my journey, the rediscovery of myself, the clarifying distance. Those were mine to treasure. "You deserve it," he said sincerely. And a lot more. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, we continued talking. Jason ordered pizza, and we moved to the living room, my outdated living room that nonetheless felt like a sanctuary to both of us now. We discussed practical next steps. He would consult a lawyer about separation terms. I would unfreeze the account, but transfer back the extra $20,000 I had added as a gift, which would now be better used elsewhere. "You could take another trip," he suggested. "Maybe longer next time." "Perhaps," I said, thinking of Elena's invitation to return for the olive harvest in October. "But right now, I'm content to be home. My garden needs attention." As Jason prepared to leave, he paused in the doorway. "I almost forgot to ask, what's the policy on grown sons moving back in with their mothers temporarily, asking for a friend?" I laughed, the sound lighter than I had expected. "Depends on the mother. This one might be persuaded as long as certain boundaries are respected." "Including fashion choices?" he asked with a hint of his old humor. "Especially those," I confirmed, straightening my shoulders in my embarrassing but perfectly comfortable cardigan. After he left, I sat on my porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the summer dusk. The confrontation with Amber's true nature had clearly been painful for Jason, but perhaps necessary. As for me, I had no illusions that this family drama was fully resolved. There would be difficult conversations ahead, legal complexities, emotional aftershocks. But sitting there in the gathering darkness, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Amber's cruelty at the dinner table had set in motion a chain of events that led to my Italian awakening, to Jason's moment of clarity, to this tentative reconciliation between mother and son. Sometimes, I reflected, the most embarrassing moments lead to the most empowering choices. And sometimes, freezing more than just a bank account is exactly what a family needs to thaw its deepest truths. 2 days after Jason's visit, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden, pruning my hydrangeas, when a sleek black Range Rover pulled into my driveway. Amber stepped out, looking immaculate in designer sunglasses and a cream pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire trip to Italy. I straightened, garden shears still in hand, and waited as she approached. Her walk was purposeful, her chin high, but I noticed a slight hesitation as she neared, perhaps realizing she was now on my territory, not hers. "Margaret," she said, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were slightly puffy beneath perfect makeup. "May I come in?" "That depends on why you're here," I replied calmly, setting down my shears on the garden bench. She glanced around nervously, as if worried the neighbors might be watching. "I'd rather not discuss personal matters outdoors." "Very well." I gestured toward the house. "Let's sit on the porch. I'll get us some iced tea." In my kitchen, I took a moment to compose myself while pouring 2 glasses of tea. Whatever Amber wanted, I was determined to maintain the sense of equilibrium I'd found in Italy. I would not be bulldozed or manipulated. When I returned to the porch, Amber was perched on the edge of a wicker chair, scrolling through her phone. She set it down quickly as I appeared, accepting the tea with a murmured thanks. "Jason's been staying with you?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "No," I corrected. "He's at Dave's place. He's only visited me once since I returned from my trip." She raised an eyebrow. "Your trip. That was quite the dramatic exit you made." "I prefer to think of it as long overdue self-care," I said, sipping my tea. "Now, what can I help you with, Amber?" Her composure slipped slightly. "You can help by talking some sense into my husband. He's making a terrible mistake. We had one disagreement, and he's blown it completely out of proportion." "From what I understand, it was more than a disagreement," I said. "He found evidence that you and your mother were strategizing about my finances." Her cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly. "That's a complete mischaracterization. Mom and I were just discussing family planning, which is perfectly normal. Jason is twisting things because he's clearly under your influence now." "My influence?" I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Amber, I was in Italy when he discovered those emails." "Which I still think was incredibly selfish," she countered. "Leaving. Without telling anyone, freezing our account. My account," I corrected. "Which I temporarily froze after you publicly humiliated me at dinner. Actions have consequences, Amber." She waved a dismissive hand. "I was trying to help you. Your image affects our social standing. That's just reality." I studied her for a moment, truly seeing the woman my son had married, beautiful, ambitious, and utterly incapable of genuine empathy. "Did you come here to apologize or to recruit me as an ally against Jason?" "I came to fix this situation," she said tightly. "The longer Jason stays away, the more complicated this becomes. We have the charity gala next weekend. People are already asking questions." "Ah?" I nodded. "The social embarrassment." "Don't pretend you don't understand how these things work," she snapped. "Your generation may have had the luxury of ignoring appearances, but in our world—" "In your world," I interrupted gently. "Not mine, not necessarily Jason's." She set down her untouched tea with a sharp click against the glass table. "I think we both know Jason wouldn't have achieved his current position without the connections and polish I've brought to his life. He was a mid-level analyst when we met. Now he's on track for partnership." "He was always talented," I pointed out, "and hard-working." "Talent and hard work aren't enough," she said with absolute conviction. "You need the right image, the right connections, the right everything. I've given him that." "At what cost?" I asked. She leaned forward, suddenly earnest. "Margaret, we can resolve this simply. You unfreeze the account permanently, not just temporarily like you told Jason. You stay in your lane regarding our marriage. I'll be more diplomatic about offering you fashion advice in the future. Everyone wins." I had to admire her audacity. "And what about the emails? The strategic planning regarding my finances?" "Water under the bridge," she said with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Family finances always get complicated. It doesn't mean anything. It meant something to Jason. Her expression hardened. Jason will get over it. He always does. He's soft-hearted. It's sweet, but impractical. Like his attachment to that quilt you made. She paused, then added with calculated gentleness, I appreciate the sentiment behind it, of course, but it's not really our aesthetic. Where is it now? I asked, suddenly curious. She shrugged. In a storage bin in the guest room closet. I couldn't exactly throw it away. The casual cruelty of this admission settled between us like a physical presence. I took a slow breath, reminding myself that anger would achieve nothing productive here. Amber, I said finally, I don't think I can help you. This is between you and Jason now. You absolutely can help, she insisted. He respects you. If you tell him to come home, I won't be doing that, I said firmly. Jason is an adult making his own decisions. She stood abruptly. This is about the money, isn't it? You're punishing me for asking for financial help, for suggesting you might be better off moving in with us eventually, rather than rattling around this outdated house alone. This house suits me perfectly, I said, remaining seated. And no, it's not about the money. It's about respect, something you seem to struggle with. Respect goes both ways, she retorted. You've never respected what I bring to Jason's life. You've never made a real effort with my parents or my friends. The accusation was so backwards that I almost laughed again. Instead, I stood to meet her gaze directly. I think it's time for you to leave, Amber. I wish things were different, but that would require changes I don't think you're willing to make. This isn't over, she warned, slipping her sunglasses back on. Robert has excellent lawyers. I'm sure he does, I acknowledged. But before you involve them, you might want to review that financial agreement Jason and I signed. It's quite specific about the purpose of those funds. She stalked back to her Range Rover without another word. As she reversed out of my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Hendricks watching discreetly from her garden next door. She gave me a thumbs up that made me smile despite the tension of the encounter. I spent the rest of the afternoon reflecting on Amber's visit while deadheading my roses. There was something almost tragic about her worldview, the reduction of all human relationships to transactions, the obsession with appearances. I wondered, what experiences had shaped her into someone so fundamentally insecure despite her outward confidence? Just before sunset, I called Jason. Your wife paid me a visit today, I said when he answered. Oh God, he groaned. What did she want? For me to convince you to come home. She suggested I stay in my lane regarding your marriage. I'm sorry, Mom. She had no right. It's fine, I assured him. I handled it. But I thought you should know. After a pause, he asked, what did you tell her? That I wouldn't be intervening. That this is between the two of you. I hesitated, then added, she mentioned your father-in-law's lawyers. Yeah, she's been threatening that, he sighed. But I've consulted with a lawyer, too. The house is complicated since it's in both our names, but the down payment agreement with you is solid. She doesn't have much leverage there. Good, I said. And Jason? She told me the quilt is in a storage bin. His voice softened. I didn't know. I'll get it when I pick up more of my things this weekend. You don't have to, I began, but he interrupted. I want to, Mom. It matters to me. After we hung up, I wrote a quick email to Elena in Florence, updating her on the latest developments. Her response came within the hour. Sounds like the daughter-in-law is realizing her plan is falling apart. Stand firm, my friend. Those Italian shoes you bought are made for walking away from toxic people. The following morning, I decided it was time to address some practical matters. I drove to my bank and met with Arthur Peterson, the financial advisor who had been helping manage my investments since Richard's death. Margaret, he greeted me warmly, rising from behind his desk. You're positively glowing. Retirement must agree with you. Italy agrees with me, I corrected with a smile. I just returned from Florence. His eyebrows rose. Wonderful. Richard always talked about wanting to take you there. Yes, well, better late than never. I settled into the chair across from him. I need to make some changes to my accounts and update my will. For the next hour, we reviewed my finances in detail. I had the joint account with Jason unfrozen, but converted it to a standard loan with a modest interest rate and clear repayment schedule. I also began the process of updating my will to include specific provisions about my house and personal possessions. Any particular reason for these changes now? Arthur asked as he made notes. Let's just say recent events have clarified what's important to me, I replied. And who? He nodded understandingly. That often happens after a significant journey. We see our lives with fresh eyes. When our meeting concluded, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. My financial house was in order, protected from potential manipulation, while still providing for Jason's legitimate needs. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Catherine Mitchell, Amber's mother. Margaret? She began without preamble. I understand you've been interfering in Jason and Amber's marriage. Hello, Catherine, I replied calmly. That's not an accurate characterization of events. Amber is devastated, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. After everything she's done to help Jason's career, to create a beautiful home. Catherine, I interrupted, I'm not interested in discussing your daughter's marriage with you. That's between Jason and Amber. You froze their account, she accused, after they'd invited you into their home. I temporarily froze an account that was established for a specific purpose, I clarified. It's been unfrozen, and the terms have been clarified. She made a dismissive sound. Terms. You're treating your son like a business partner instead of family. On the contrary, I said evenly, I'm treating him like an adult who makes commitments and honors them. And frankly, Catherine, given the emails between you and Amber about strategizing to access my finances, I think clear boundaries are entirely appropriate. There was a startled pause. He told you about those? Yes. And while I understand a mother wanting to help her daughter, planning to exploit a family relationship crosses a line. That's a complete misinterpretation, she sputtered. We were simply discussing reasonable family financial planning. Perhaps, I conceded, though I didn't believe it for a second. But regardless, I've made my decisions about my finances, and they're not up for debate. Robert will be very disappointed to hear this, she said, her tone implying this should concern me greatly. I'm sure I'll survive his disappointment, I replied dryly. Now, if there's nothing else, I should go. My book club meets in an hour. After Catherine hung up, I laughed quietly to myself. There was no book club tonight. I simply couldn't bear another minute of her self-righteous posturing. The old Margaret might have endured it politely, might have apologized for standing her ground. But Florence had changed something fundamental, in me, awakening a dormant courage. The next week passed in relative calm. Jason moved more of his belongings to Dave's apartment and filed initial separation papers. Amber called him repeatedly but seemed to have given up on persuading me to intervene. I returned to my routines, gardening, weekly bridge with friends, volunteer work at the local library, but with a new sense of ownership over my life. Elena and I exchanged emails regularly, and I found myself seriously considering her invitation to return to Florence for the olive harvest. Why not? My garden would be dormant by then, and Connecticut autumns, while beautiful, could also be melancholy. 10 days after Amber's visit, I was weeding my front garden when a different luxury car pulled into my driveway. Robert Mitchell emerged, looking every inch the successful Boston businessman in his tailored suit despite the summer heat. Mrs. Wilson, he said, approaching with the confident stride of someone unused to being denied. Mr. Mitchell, I responded, straightening. Unlike with Amber, I didn't invite him inside. Something in his expression, a barely concealed hostility, made me wary. He got straight to the point. This situation has gone on long enough. My daughter is being unfairly punished for what was, at worst, a momentary lapse in tact. Is that what she told you happened? I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly. Amber explained that she offered some well-intentioned fashion advice that you took personally, and now you've convinced Jason to leave her. It's completely disproportionate. That's a creative interpretation, I said mildly. But ultimately, the decision to leave was Jason's, not mine. After you poisoned him against her, he insisted, and after you reneged on your financial commitment. I didn't renege on anything, I corrected. The funds were provided, the terms were clear, and the account has been unfrozen with a formal loan agreement in place. Loan agreement? He scoffed. Between mother and son. It's absurd. Perhaps in your family, I said. Not in mine. He studied me with open disdain. You know, when Jason first introduced Amber to us, I wondered why he was so drawn to her. She could have had her pick of young men from excellent families. Now I see it. He was raised to be weak, to let a woman control the finances and make the decisions. The sexism was so blatant it almost made me laugh. Is that how your marriage works? Robert? Catherine defers to all your decisions? His face flushed. That's not... Because from what I've observed, I continued, Catherine seems to have quite a bit of influence over your family's direction. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Partnership takes many forms. This isn't about my marriage, he snapped. No, I agreed. It's about Jason and Amber's, and perhaps a bit about your disappointment that your strategic alliance isn't working out as planned. His expression confirmed my suspicion. This was about more than his daughter's happiness. It was about lost connections, lost opportunities, lost access to whatever he had hoped to gain through Jason. I didn't come here to debate, he said stiffly. I came to tell you that if Jason doesn't return home by the end of the month, there will be consequences, legal and otherwise. That sounds suspiciously like a threat, I observed. A reality check, he corrected. Divorces are messy, expensive, and can damage careers. Jason should consider that carefully before proceeding. I regarded him steadily. I'll convey your concern to Jason, but he's an adult making his own choices. Robert turned to leave, then paused. You know, Margaret, life can be very lonely for women of your age. Alienating your son and his wife seems incredibly short-sighted. The barb was meant to wound, to strike at my deepest fears. 6 weeks ago, it might have. Now, I simply smiled. Thank you for your concern about my social life, Robert. But as it happens, I've made some wonderful new friends recently. In fact, I'm considering spending the fall in Italy. The olive harvest is supposedly magnificent. His confusion at my serenity was almost comical. He retreated to his car without another word, leaving me to my garden and my thoughts. That evening, I called Jason and relayed the conversation with his father-in-law. He actually threatened your career? I asked, concerned. Jason sighed heavily. He has some connections at my firm. Not enough to get me fired, but enough to make things uncomfortable. But Mom, I'm not going back just because of that. Good, I said firmly. There are other firms, other opportunities, but there's only one life to live authentically. When did you get so philosophical? He asked, a smile in his voice. Somewhere between the Uffizi Gallery and my third cappuccino, I replied. Florence has that effect. After we hung up, I sat on my porch as twilight settled over my garden. The confrontations with Amber, Catherine, and Robert had been unpleasant but clarifying. They had shown me exactly who these people were, and in turn, had helped me rediscover who I was. Not just Jason's mother or Richard's widow, but Margaret Wilson, gardener, traveler, friend, woman of substance, someone who wouldn't be embarrassed into silence or manipulated out of her resources, someone who had found her voice at 62 and wasn't afraid to use it. The Fireflies were just beginning their summer light show when I opened Elena's latest email. Rooms are filling up for October, she'd written. Shall I reserve yours? Without hesitation, I typed my reply, yes, please. This time I'm staying for a month. August arrived with a heat wave that blanketed Connecticut in sticky, oppressive air. My garden wilted despite daily watering, and even the most dedicated golfers at the country club down the street retreated, indoors. I found myself spending more time in my air-conditioned living room, planning my October trip to Florence and catching up on books I'd neglected. Jason had settled into a routine that included dinner at my house twice a week. The separation from Amber had been formalized, though the divorce proceedings were moving slowly. Robert Mitchell's threats about Jason's career had materialized in small ways. A prime account reassigned, subtle exclusion from certain meetings, but nothing catastrophic. Anderson and Burke reached out again, Jason mentioned one evening as we shared a simple dinner of cold pasta salad and grilled chicken on my screened porch. Anderson and Burke was a competing financial firm that had been courting Jason for months. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, though internally I was pleased. A fresh start might be exactly what he needed. The offer's solid, he continued, twirling pasta around his fork. Better than solid, actually. And no connections to the Mitchell family. Sounds promising, I said carefully. Have you decided? He set down his fork with deliberate precision. I think it's time for a change. The last few months have been clarifying. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the best outcomes. Speaking of decisions, he said, have you confirmed your Italy plans? Yes, I leave October 2nd. I smiled, anticipation warming me despite the month's distance. Elena's arranged a small apartment for me near her place. I'll be there for the olive harvest and most of the fall season. I'm happy for you, Mom, he said sincerely. After everything that's happened, you deserve this adventure. Later, as he was leaving, Jason handed me a small wrapped package. I almost forgot. I found this when I was packing more of my things last weekend. Inside was a delicate silver picture frame containing a photo I hadn't seen in years. Richard holding 3-year-old Jason on his shoulders at a county fair, both of them laughing with identical expressions of joy. My breath caught at the sight. I thought it was lost in the move, I said, running my finger over the tarnished silver. It was in one of Dad's old boxes in the attic, Jason explained. Amber wanted to throw everything out, but I moved some things to the storage unit instead. The bait. Casual mention of Amber's disregard for family memories might have angered me once. Now it merely confirmed what I already knew about her values. Thank you for rescuing it, I said, hugging him tightly. It's precious to me. After Jason left, I placed the photograph on the mantel beside more recent family photos. The contrast was striking. The carefree happiness of that long-ago fair day versus the more composed, carefully arranged portraits of recent years. When had we all started worrying so much about appearances? When had authentic joy been replaced by calculated presentation? The next morning, I was surprised to receive an email from Leslie Davis, one of Amber's closest friends and a fixture at their dinner parties. The subject line read simply, "Coffee?" Curious, I agreed to meet her at a small cafe in town that afternoon. When I arrived, Leslie was already seated at an outdoor table under a large umbrella, sipping an iced latte. With her expertly highlighted hair and designer sundress, she reminded me immediately of Amber's polished social circle. Margaret, she greeted me with a warm smile that seemed genuine. Thanks for meeting me. I wasn't sure you would. I admit, I was intrigued, I said, settling across from her. We haven't really had a chance to talk one-on-one before. After ordering my own iced tea, I turned back to find Leslie studying me with open curiosity. You look different, she said finally. More, I don't know, centered? Amber always described you as mousy and old-fashioned, but you're not what I expected. The blunt assessment was so unexpected that I laughed. I suppose that depends on your expectations. She had the grace to look embarrassed. Sorry, that came out wrong. I just mean you seem confident. Not like someone who needs help? Amber's kind of help, you mean? I kept my tone light, but my guard was up. Was this meeting some kind of reconnaissance mission on Amber's behalf? Leslie surprised me by grimacing. Yeah, look, I should get to the point. Amber and I have been friends since college, and I care about her. But the way she's handled this whole situation with you and Jason, it's not right. Now I was genuinely intrigued. Go on. She's been telling everyone that you manipulated Jason into leaving her, that you froze their account out of spite, that you're jealous of her youth and lifestyle. Leslie stirred her latte uncomfortably. Most of our friends have been supportive, because, well, that's what friends do. But privately, some of us have questions. Why are you telling me this? I asked directly. She set her spoon down with a small clink. Because last week at brunch, Amber mentioned that her father was looking into ways to have you declared incompetent to manage your own finances. She said they might try to get Jason appointed as your guardian, then pressure him to fix your financial decisions. A chill ran through me despite the August heat. She said this openly? At brunch? Leslie nodded. With 4 other friends present. She was drinking mimosas and getting worked up about how unfair everything is. When Rachel suggested that maybe she should just move on and accept the divorce, Amber said, "It's not about the marriage anymore. It's about the principle and the money." I took a slow sip of my tea, processing this information. Why would you risk your friendship with Amber to warn me? Leslie looked down at her manicured nails. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She was a lot like you, practical, independent, maybe not fashionable by today's standards. When she got older, my aunt tried something similar, claiming Gran was incompetent to manage her own affairs. It was ugly and cruel and completely untrue. What happened? I asked softly. Gran fought back. Got documentation from her doctors about her mental capacity, changed her will, made sure everyone knew exactly what my aunt was trying to do. A small, satisfied smile appeared. My aunt ended up with nothing but a damaged reputation. Gran lived to 92, sharp as a tack until the end. The parallel to my situation wasn't exact, but the warning was clear. Thank you for telling me, Leslie. I appreciate it more than you know. She nodded, then hesitated before adding, There's one more thing. Amber's been saying you have early-stage dementia, that you've been showing signs for years but refusing to get treatment. She claims that's why you suddenly went to Italy without telling anyone, a moment of confusion that you're too proud to admit. The accusation was so outrageous it momentarily left me speechless. That's completely fabricated, I finally managed. I figured, Leslie said, but she's telling it convincingly, and she mentioned that her father has medical connections. Who might help document your condition. She made air quotes around the phrase, her disdain evident. Why would you doubt her story? I asked. You barely know me. Leslie looked thoughtful. I'm a school counselor, Margaret. I've worked with hundreds of families, including many elderly, parents and grandparents. People with cognitive decline don't suddenly plan international trips, manage complex financial transactions, or speak as clearly and logically as you do. She smiled ruefully. Plus, Amber tends to exaggerate when she's not getting her way, always has. After we parted ways, I sat in my car for several minutes, thoughts racing. The idea that the Mitchells would attempt to have me declared incompetent hadn't occurred to me, though perhaps it should have. Their determination to access my finances had already been demonstrated through Amber's strategic planning with her mother. Rather than panicking, I found myself approaching the problem methodically, just as I had managed our family finances for decades. By the time I arrived home, I had a clear action plan. My first call was to Arthur Peterson at the bank. I explained the situation without emotion, presenting it as a precautionary measure rather than an emergency. I need documentation of my financial management over the past 5 years, I told him. Proof that I've been handling my affairs competently and consistently. Arthur sounded concerned. Margaret, this sounds serious. Are you sure you wouldn't rather have a lawyer handle this? I'll be speaking with a lawyer as well, I assured him. But I'd like to gather all the relevant information first. Next, I called Dr. Eleanor Winters, my primary physician for the past decade. Her receptionist couldn't fit me in for a full physical and cognitive assessment until the following week, but I secured the appointment and made it clear that I would need detailed documentation of the results. Finally, I reached out to Patricia Montgomery, a retired attorney who played bridge with me every Thursday. Though no longer practicing, she would know which lawyers in town specialized in elder law and guardianship issues. Morgan Whitfield, she said without hesitation when I explained my concerns. She's tough as nails and has demolished several unfounded competency challenges in recent years. Shall I give her your number? By evening, I had appointments set with both Morgan Whitfield and a neuropsychologist she recommended for independent cognitive testing. I felt oddly calm, even as I recognized the seriousness of the potential threat. There was something empowering about taking direct action rather than simply reacting. I debated whether to tell Jason about Amber's latest scheme. On one hand, I didn't want to burden him with additional stress while he was negotiating his career transition. On the other, he deserved to know what his estranged wife was planning, especially if it involved him being appointed as my guardian. In the end, transparency won out. I called him the next morning and relayed Leslie's warning as factually as possible. She's claiming what? Jason's voice rose in disbelief. That's insane, Mom. No one who's spent 5 minutes with you would believe you're anything but completely sharp. Nevertheless, I said calmly, the Mitchells apparently have medical connections who might be willing to say otherwise. This is a new low, he muttered, even for them. I'm already taking steps to protect myself, I assured him. Morgan, Whitfield is meeting with me tomorrow, and I have appointments for cognitive assessments next week. I'll be there, he said immediately. What time? That's not necessary. It is, he interrupted firmly. I failed to stand up for you once before. Never again. His determination was touching, but I gently redirected. Actually, there's a more effective way you can help. Document any conversations where Amber or her parents mentioned concerns about my cognitive health. When did they first bring it up? Who was present? Were there any specific incidents they cited? They never mentioned anything like that, Jason said, his confusion evident. Not once in our entire marriage. This is completely fabricated. Exactly, I said. And your testimony to that effect will be powerful. After hanging up, I went to my study and began organizing my financial records from the past 5 years. The methodical task was soothing, giving my hands something to do while my mind processed this new challenge. Each neatly labeled folder and spreadsheet was evidence of my continuing competence. As I worked, I reflected on how differently I was responding to this threat compared to Amber's original insult about my clothing. 6 months ago, I might have been devastated by such a personal attack, might have doubted myself or sought to appease. Now I felt almost detached, seeing Amber's accusations for what they were, desperate attempts to regain control. My phone rang around noon. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson? This is Morgan Whitfield. I've had a cancellation and could see you this afternoon if that works for you. 2 hours later, I was seated in the tasteful office of a woman whose silver hair was cut in a sharp bob that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. Morgan Whitfield listened without interruption as I explained the situation, taking occasional notes. Let me be clear, she said when I finished. You have no symptoms of cognitive decline, no history of concerning behaviors, and your son, who would presumably be the petitioner in any guardianship proceeding, Has no concerns about your capacity. Correct, I confirmed. And you believe your former daughter-in-law and her family are considering this action because you've restricted their access to your finances? Yes. I provided funds for a home down payment but established clear repayment terms that they seem reluctant to honor. Morgan set down her pen with a decisive click. Mrs. Wilson, I've handled dozens of guardianship cases. Based on what you've told me, any petition they might file would be frivolous at best and potentially sanctionable at worst. Meaning not only would they lose, but they could face penalties for bringing a baseless claim. She smiled thinly. Judges don't appreciate having their time wasted with transparent attempts to gain control of someone else's assets. Her confidence was reassuring, but I remained practical. Still, I'd like to be prepared. Absolutely, she agreed. We'll gather comprehensive documentation of your cognitive health and financial management. We'll also prepare a durable power of attorney naming someone you trust, not your son, given the circumstances, to make decisions if you ever become incapacitated. My friend Elena in Florence, I said immediately, surprising myself with the certainty of the choice. She has no connection to the Mitchells and knows me well enough to understand my wishes. Morgan nodded approvingly. A good choice. Independent. And without conflict of interest. By the time I left her office, we had a detailed strategy in place. Morgan would begin preparing the necessary legal documents while I gathered evidence of my continuing competence. She also suggested I keep a daily journal documenting my activities and decisions, further proof of my clear cognitive function. One more thing, she said as I was leaving. I recommend being very careful about what you say to the Mitchells or anyone in their circle. Anything could be twisted or taken out of context. I understand, I assured her. I've already limited my contact with them. On the drive home, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past few months. What had begun with a humiliating comment about my clothing had evolved into a complex family drama involving frozen accounts, international travel, divorce, proceedings, and now potential guardianship challenges. Yet through it all, I had discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. Each new challenge had pushed me to stand taller, think more clearly, and advocate for myself more effectively. Far from diminishing me, Amber's attempts to control and undermine had ultimately empowered me. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a delivery van departing from next door. Mrs. Hendricks waved from her porch, gesturing for me to come over. Perfect timing, she called. I just received a care package from my daughter in California. There's far too much for just me. Would you join me for some wine and artisanal cheese? An hour later, seated on Mrs. Hendricks's patio with a glass of excellent Sonoma Valley Chardonnay, I found myself sharing the latest developments with my neighbor. Incompetent? You? Mrs. Hendricks snorted inelegantly. I should be so cognitively impaired. You're the sharpest woman in our bridge club, and you thrashed us all last week. It's just a desperate ploy, I agreed. But I'm taking it seriously. As you should, she said, topping off my wine. Though I must say, Margaret, all this drama seems to agree with you. You've got more spark now than I've seen since before Richard passed. Her observation startled me, but I realized it was true. Despite the challenges, or perhaps because of them, I felt more alive than I had in years. Not just existing in my comfortable routines, but actively engaging with life's complications and possibilities. I suppose adversity can be clarified, I said. Mrs. Hendricks raised her glass. To clarity, then, and to embarrassing clothes that lead to unexpectedly interesting journeys. I laughed and clinked my glass against hers. Indeed, though I think my next journey will involve fewer family complications and more Italian wine. Now that, she said with a wink, sounds like the plan of a perfectly competent woman to me. As the sunlight slanted golden across the patio, I found myself filled with a quiet confidence. Whatever the Mitchells might attempt next, I was prepared to meet it. Not with the hesitant uncertainty of 6 months ago, but with the steady resolve of a woman who had rediscovered her worth. The joint account that Amber had once seen as a pathway to my finances had become, ironically, the catalyst for my reclaimed independence. Sometimes the most effective response to those who would diminish you isn't confrontation or capitulation, but simply standing firmly in your own truth. And if that truth involved Italian shoes, newfound friendships, and the courage to protect what was rightfully mine, well, that was a fashion statement even Amber couldn't criticize. Florence welcomed me back like an old friend. Elena was waiting at the airport, her smile wide and her embrace warm as I emerged from the customs area. "You look wonderful," she exclaimed, appraising me with an expert eye. "Whatever drama you've been managing in Connecticut, it clearly agrees with you." I laughed, feeling the tension of the past weeks begin to dissolve. Nothing builds character like being declared mentally incompetent by your former in-laws. During the taxi ride to her building, I filled Elena in on the latest developments, including Robert Mitchell's audacious settlement proposal. "The arrogance," she exclaimed, her Italian inflections becoming more pronounced with her indignation. "To think you would pay them to stop lying about you." Desperation often masquerades as confidence, I observed as we pulled up to the familiar stone building. That would be my home for the next 2 weeks? The apartment Elena had secured for me was small but charming. A one-bedroom space with high ceilings, terracotta tiles, and a tiny balcony that caught the morning sun. It was on the same floor as her own apartment, separated by only 2 other units. "You'll have privacy but not isolation," she explained as she helped me settle in. "And I've stocked your refrigerator with essentials. The rest we can purchase tomorrow at the Mercato." That first evening set the tone for my shortened visit. Elena and 2 other friends joined me for a simple dinner at a neighborhood trattoria where the owner greeted Elena by name and welcomed me back to Florence with an extra glass of the house wine. The conversation flowed easily, touching on art, exhibitions, local politics, and the upcoming olive harvest, with no mention of guardianship petitions or disapproving in-laws. For the first time in months, I felt the wonderful lightness of being known simply as Margaret, not as someone's mother or widow or financial resource, but as myself. The next 10 days passed in a blur of sensory pleasures and quiet contentment. Mornings typically began with coffee on my tiny balcony, watching the courtyard below come to life. Elena and I would often meet for late breakfast before setting out on whatever adventure she had planned for the day. One morning found us in the Tuscan countryside, visiting a small family olive grove where preparations for the harvest were underway. The owner, Matteo, showed us the centuries-old trees and explained the traditional harvesting methods his family still employed. "We reject the mechanical harvesters," he said proudly as we walked among the gnarled trunks. "Each olive receives our hand's attention, just as my grandfather taught my father and my father taught me." I was struck by how his connection to tradition enhanced rather than limited his life, unlike the restrictive expectations Amber had tried to impose on me. Here, tradition was a foundation to build upon, not a cage to confine. Another day was spent entirely in the Uffizi Gallery, moving slowly through rooms filled with Renaissance masterpieces. Elena, who had once worked as an art history professor before retiring to Italy, provided context and insights that no guidebook could match. "Look at the confidence in her expression," she said as we stood before Botticelli's Birth of Venus. "The ancient symbolism of feminine divine power, emerging fully formed and unashamed." I gazed at the famous painting with new eyes, seeing beyond its familiar beauty to the statement of feminine strength it represented. "I never considered it that way before." "Most people don't," Elena replied. "They see beauty without recognizing power." Throughout these days, I maintained contact with Morgan through regular email updates. The legal preparation was continuing smoothly in my absence. Our documentation package had been formally submitted to the court, and Morgan reported that Gerald Hammond had requested a meeting, a sign that the Mitchells' legal team was reassessing their position after reviewing our evidence. "We're negotiating from strength," Morgan wrote. "Their affidavits are crumbling under scrutiny, and Dr. Pearson is backpedaling on his professional opinion now that we've submitted 3 comprehensive cognitive assessments from specialists who actually examined you." Jason also checked in regularly, his texts and occasional calls providing updates on his new position at Anderson and Burke, challenging but in the good way, and the divorce proceedings, moving forward, though Amber's being difficult about the art collection. During our last conversation before my return flight, he mentioned something unexpected. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately." "Oh?" I said, curious about this turn in the conversation. "Yeah, specifically about something he told me right before I left for college. He said, 'Always pay attention to how someone treats service staff and handles small disappointments. It tells you everything you need to know about their character.'" I smiled at the memory. Richard had indeed lived by that principle. He was quite wise about people. "He was," Jason agreed. "And I didn't listen. Amber was always charming to me, but she was consistently rude to waiters, flight attendants, retail clerks, and any minor inconvenience was treated like a personal affront. The signs were all there." "We see what we're ready to see," I said gently. "And sometimes we need to learn lessons in our own time." "I guess so," he sighed. "Anyway, just wanted you to know I'm thinking about him, and that I'm grateful for the example you both set, even if it took me a while to appreciate it. The connection between us felt stronger than it had in years, not just mother and son, but 2 adults sharing mutual respect and understanding. Whatever else the Mitchells' schemes had cost us, this renewed bond was a priceless gain." As my departure date approached, I found myself experiencing conflicting emotions. Part of me was eager to return home and face the court hearing directly, to look Robert and Catherine Mitchell in the eye as their fabrications were systematically dismantled. Another part wished to remain in this Florentine idyll, where cappuccinos were perfect and friendship was uncomplicated. "You're coming back in the spring," Elena reminded me on my final evening as we shared a bottle of wine on my balcony. "This is just an intermission, not an ending." "True," I agreed, watching the sunset paint the terracotta rooftops golden. "And I have unfinished business to attend to." "The Mitchells won't know what hit them," she predicted with satisfaction. "They thought they were dealing with a traditional accommodating widow who would crumble under pressure." "Their mistake," I said, raising my glass in a small toast. "Their mistake," Elena echoed, clinking her glass against mine. The flight back to Connecticut was long, but gave me valuable time to prepare mentally for what lay ahead. Morgan had arranged for Jason to meet me at the airport, and she would join us the following morning to review our strategy for the hearing. When I emerged from the arrival gate, Jason was waiting, his face breaking into a relieved smile when he spotted me. "Welcome home, Mom. How was the flight?" "Long but uneventful," I replied, accepting his hug. "How are things here?" His expression turned serious as we walked toward the parking garage. "Interesting developments. Morgan will brief you fully tomorrow, but essentially, the Mitchells seem to be in disarray. Gerald Hammond requested a continuance of the hearing, which the judge denied. Then Dr. Pearson apparently sent a letter to the court withdrawing his previous statement. Withdrawing it? This was unexpected news. Did Morgan say why? She thinks your documentation package spooked him, particularly the evaluations from Barrett and Winters. As a physician, he could face professional consequences for making assertions contradicted by multiple specialists' direct examinations. Nodded thoughtfully. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. There's something else, Jason added as we reached his car. Amber contacted me yesterday asking if we could meet to discuss the situation. I referred her to my lawyer, of course. Did she say what she wanted to discuss? Not specifically, but she sounded different, less entitled, more uncertain. He shrugged as he loaded my suitcase into the trunk. Maybe reality is finally sinking in. The following morning, Morgan arrived at my home carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression of contained satisfaction. "Welcome back," she greeted me. "You're looking remarkably well for someone supposedly suffering from cognitive decline." I laughed, ushering her into the living room where coffee and pastries waited. "Florence has restorative powers. Now tell me about these developments Jason mentioned." Morgan settled into an armchair and accepted a coffee mug. "The Mitchells' case is imploding spectacularly." After Dr. Pearson withdrew his statement, Hammond attempted to find another medical professional willing to support their petition. Apparently, no reputable physician would touch it after reviewing our documentation. "That's encouraging," I said. "It gets better," she continued. "Robert Mitchell apparently tried to pressure Catherine's cousin, who's a retired neurologist, into providing a supporting statement. The cousin not only refused but was so disturbed by the request that he contacted my office to express concerns about potential elder abuse, directed at you." Jason, who had joined us for the meeting, whistled softly. "Their own family is turning against them?" "It appears so," Morgan confirmed. "The most recent development came yesterday afternoon. Hammond filed a motion seeking to withdraw the petition entirely." "They're giving up?" I asked, surprised by this sudden capitulation. "Not willingly," Morgan clarified. "Hammond's motion cites new information that materially affects the petitioner's claims." Reading between the lines, I believe he's recognized that proceeding would not only result in defeat, but could potentially expose his clients to sanctions for filing a frivolous petition. "So, the hearing tomorrow?" I began. "Will likely be brief," Morgan finished. "The judge will review the motion to withdraw, possibly ask a few questions, and almost certainly grant it. However," she added with emphasis, "this presents us with an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Jason asked. Morgan leaned forward. "We can file a counter-motion seeking costs and requesting that the withdrawal be granted with prejudice, meaning they cannot refile similar claims in the future without significant new evidence. We can also request that the judge make specific findings regarding the lack of merit in their claims." "Would that be public record?" I asked, thinking through the implications. "Yes," Morgan confirmed. "And while I don't generally recommend making legal proceedings about public embarrassment, in this case, having an official court record stating that their claims were baseless provides important protection for you going forward." I considered this carefully. "Let's proceed with the counter motion, not for revenge, but for protection." "Excellent," Morgan said, making a note in her folder. "I've already drafted it in anticipation of your decision. Now, let's review what to expect tomorrow." For the next hour, we discussed the likely format of the hearing, the questions the judge might ask, and how I should present myself. Morgan emphasized the importance of calm, clear responses and advised against showing anger toward the Mitchells, no matter how provoking they might be. "The judge will be evaluating your cognitive clarity and emotional stability," she explained. "Your best approach is to be exactly who you are, a competent, thoughtful woman who has been wrongfully accused." By the time Morgan left, I felt fully prepared for the following day's proceedings. Jason stayed for lunch, during which we carefully avoided discussing the hearing, focusing instead on his new position and my abbreviated Italian adventure. As he was preparing to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know I'm proud of how you've handled all of this. Most people would have been devastated by what Amber and her parents tried to do." "I'm not most people," I replied with a small smile. "As you and the Mitchells have discovered." The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cool, a perfect early October day. I dressed carefully in a navy suit with a silk blouse and the Italian scarf that had become something of a talisman. Professional but not severe, stylish but not trying too hard. Exactly who I was. Morgan met us at the courthouse, looking formidable. in a charcoal gray suit with subtle red accents. "You look perfect," she approved as we entered the imposing building. Confident, but not confrontational. The courtroom was less dramatic than television had led me to expect. A wood-paneled room with simple furnishings and subdued lighting. Robert and Catherine Mitchell were already seated with Gerald Hammond, their backs rigid with tension. Amber was notably absent. As we took our places at the opposite table, I caught Catherine's eye briefly. Her gaze skittered away, unwilling to hold contact. Robert stared straight ahead, his expression carved from stone. When Judge Eleanor Simmons entered, we all rose. She was a woman in her early 60s with silver streaks dark hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, someone who radiated no-nonsense competence. After the formalities of calling the court to order, she addressed the attorneys directly. "I've reviewed the petition, the extensive documentation submitted by the respondent, and the petitioner's motion to withdraw. Mr. Hammond, would you like to make a statement regarding your motion?" Hammond rose, his manner professionally detached. "Yes, Your Honor. Upon further investigation and consideration of additional medical evidence, my clients have determined that continuing this petition would not serve any constructive purpose. We therefore respectfully request permission to withdraw." Judge Simmons regarded him steadily. "Ms. Whitfield, I see you've filed a counter-motion regarding this withdrawal. Would you care to address the court?" Morgan stood with calm authority. "Yes, Your Honor. While we do not oppose the withdrawal of this petition, we request that it be dismissed with prejudice and that the court make specific findings regarding its lack of merit. As detailed in our documentation, this petition was filed without adequate medical evidence and appears to have been motivated by financial considerations rather than genuine concern for Mrs. Wilson's welfare." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Hammond, would your clients like to respond to these assertions?" Hammond conferred briefly with the Mitchells before responding. "Your Honor, my clients maintain that they filed this petition out of sincere concern. However, they acknowledge that the medical evidence submitted by Mrs. Wilson clearly establishes her competence, and they do not wish to prolong these proceedings." Judge Simmons removed her glasses, directing her gaze first at Hammond and the Mitchells, then at Morgan and me. "I have reviewed the documentation in this case thoroughly. The medical evaluations provided by Mrs. Wilson are comprehensive and conclusive regarding her cognitive capacity. In contrast, the petition was supported primarily by unsubstantiated anecdotes and a medical opinion from a physician who never examined the respondent. A physician who has since withdrawn his statement." Robert Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the judge continued. "Furthermore, the timing of this petition, coinciding with an ongoing financial dispute and filed just before Mrs. Wilson's planned international travel, suggests motives that are not aligned with the purpose of guardianship proceedings." The judge paused, her expression severe. "Guardianship is a serious legal intervention designed to protect vulnerable individuals from harm. It is not a tool to be wielded in family disputes or financial negotiations. The misuse of guardianship proceedings wastes court resources and can cause significant harm to the falsely accused." She replaced her glasses deliberately. "I am granting the motion to withdraw, but I am doing so with prejudice. Additionally, I am ordering the petitioners to reimburse Mrs. Wilson for reasonable legal expenses incurred in defending against these unfounded claims. Ms. Whitfield, please submit an accounting of these expenses within 2 weeks." With a final tap of her gavel, it was over. The Mitchells rose stiffly, avoiding eye contact with us as they followed Hammond from the courtroom. I remained seated for a moment, absorbing the finality of the judge's ruling. "Congratulations," Morgan said quietly. "A complete victory." Jason squeezed my hand. "It's really over." Outside the courthouse, the October sunshine felt especially bright. As we descended the steps, I spotted a familiar figure waiting near the bottom, Amber, elegant as always in a camel-colored coat, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. She approached hesitantly as we reached the sidewalk. Jason, Margaret, may I speak with you? Jason tensed beside me. Anything you have to say can go through my attorney. Please, she said, a note of genuine entreaty in her voice. Just 2 minutes. I glanced at Morgan, who gave a slight nod. 2 minutes, I agreed. Jason, would you prefer to wait in the car? I'll stay, he said firmly. Amber took a deep breath. I wanted to tell you that I didn't know about the guardianship petition until after it was filed. When my father told me what they'd done, I was shocked. I may have said things in anger about your trip and your decisions, but I never intended for them to take legal action. Yet you provided an affidavit, Jason pointed out coldly. She had the grace to look ashamed. Yes. By then they had already filed, and my father was persuasive about family loyalty. I regret that decision now. Why are you telling us this? I asked directly. Because I'm trying to salvage what's left of my dignity, she admitted. The divorce is proceeding, our house is on the market, and my parents' scheme has failed spectacularly. I can keep fighting and end up with nothing but legal bills and bitterness, or I can accept reality and move forward. Her unexpected self-awareness was surprising. Perhaps facing multiple defeats had finally pierced her sense of entitlement. I appreciate your candor, I said finally, but understanding doesn't erase consequences. I know, she acknowledged. I just wanted you both to know that I'm withdrawing my objections to the divorce settlement Jason proposed. The house proceeds will be divided fairly, and your loan will be repaid in full from my share, Margaret. It's the right thing to do. After she walked away, Jason let out a long breath. Do you believe her? I believe she's finally recognized that her strategy has failed, I said. Whether that constitutes genuine remorse is another question. Morgan, who had remained tactfully silent during the exchange, now joined us. A pragmatic decision on her part. It will certainly simplify the divorce proceedings. As Jason drove me home, we discussed the implications of the day's events. The judge's ruling, Amber's apparent capitulation, the Mitchells' decisive defeat. By the time we reached my driveway, a sense of peaceful closure had settled over me. Dinner. Tonight? Jason asked as he carried my briefcase to the door. We should celebrate. Actually, I said, I think I'd like a quiet evening at home. Maybe tomorrow? He nodded understandingly. Tomorrow is perfect. Get some rest, Mom. You've earned it. Alone in my house, my comfortable, outdated house that had weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, I moved from room to room, reconnecting with the space that was uniquely mine. In the living room, I paused before the mantel, where the silver-framed photo of Richard and young Jason now held pride of place. You would have been proud today, I told Richard's smiling image. Of both of us. Later, as twilight softened the edges of my garden, I sat on the porch swing with a glass of wine and Elena's latest email open on my tablet. She was already planning activities for my spring visit, art exhibitions, day trips to medieval villages, a cooking class specializing in regional pastas. The olive oil from this year's harvest will be ready by then, she'd written. Liquid gold, my friend. Like you, becoming more valuable and essential with time. I smiled at her characterization, recognizing its truth. The past 6 months had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined when Amber first criticized my clothing at that fateful dinner. What had begun as an act of self-defense, freezing the joint account, had ultimately led to self-discovery. I was no longer defined primarily as Jason's mother or Richard's widow, but as Margaret Wilson, traveler, friend, gardener, woman of substance. Someone who had faced attempts at financial manipulation, public humiliation, and false accusations of mental decline, and had emerged stronger, clearer, and more authentically herself. The Mitchells had underestimated me from the beginning. They had seen only what they expected to see, an aging woman in outdated clothes, someone they assumed would be easily managed and manipulated. They had mistaken politeness for weakness, tradition for limitation, accommodation for lack of backbone. Their greatest miscalculation had been believing that by embarrassing me about my appearance, they could control me. Instead, they had inadvertently set me free to explore new places, forge new friendships, and rediscover my own worth beyond others. Expectations. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I made a silent toast to unexpected journeys and unlikely catalysts. To Italian scarves and frozen bank accounts. To the strength that comes from standing firmly in your own truth, regardless of the clothes you wear while doing so. And to the sweet, satisfying knowledge that sometimes the most effective response to those who would diminish you is simply to rise. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.